Hey, football fanatics, back again, June 11th. Outside, it certainly doesn't feel like football weather, that's for sure. Let's start this week in college football. I got two words for you: Brendan Sorsby. That is the story du jour right now in college football. A judge in, Lubbock, Texas, how convenient, ruled that he would be eligible. He's suspended for 2 games, and he will be eligible to play after those 2 games. She served an injunction to the original ruling, and what a mess. What a mess. And if you haven't read my column this week at PennSports.live, do so. It is a column on all this mess that is college football and the bill they're trying to pass and the hearings that were held last week and all that good stuff, which I covered a little bit on here last week. But one of my themes in the column, or it is the theme in the column, the adults in the room. So the adults in the room, someone has to step up and be an adult. Someone has to step up and look out for the best interest of the sport. It cannot always be about dollar signs. So Texas Tech isn't going to step up. First of all, you've got a judge. This is corruption as far as I'm concerned. This should be appealed. There should be an appeal process where you can find a neutral judge. A judge in Lubbock is by no means neutral. She ruled in favor of Lubbock, her hometown. Because if Texas Tech is good in football, that's going to bring a lot of revenue to Lubbock. And it's going to bring eyeballs to Lubbock. Not sure if you want eyeballs on Lubbock, Texas, but hey, who am I to judge? She ruled in what her interest was, what her town's interest was. So she wasn't the adult in the room. The Texas Tech president could step in and say, you know what, this is a bridge too far. We're not going to do that. He or she, I don't know who the president is, are not going to do that. The AD has come out and said, hey, what are we doing wrong? Well, they're not. By the letter of the law, they're not doing anything wrong. They paid him $5 million to come to Texas Tech to play football. Now, I would presume if he doesn't play, if he would have been ruled ineligible, I assume they're not paying that $5 million. I certainly would hope that was in the contract. But I get that. I suppose I get their point. We paid $5 million for this guy to help us win football games. We think he's going to help us win football games. We think he's going to help us win the Big 12 and get to the college football playoffs, which is every school's goal. I get where he's coming from with that. But again, the reason college football is out of hand, college sports in general, not just football, but basketball as well, is because none of the adults want to do the right thing. They want to do the thing that is going to make them A, successful, and B, rich. And if Brendan Sorsby helps Texas Tech get to the college football playoffs, everyone eats. Everyone at Texas Tech will be eating. So that's their decision is coming solely from a financial standpoint. Okay. Because they're certainly not going to look good. When that kid takes the field at the first away game, it's going to be ugly. And can you imagine the signs? Can you imagine the college game day signs this year directed at this kid and at Texas Tech? So it's certainly, they're not doing it for image. That's for darn sure. They are doing it for dollar signs. So that brings us to the others now. The Big Ten and the SEC, and there's been some Big 12 anonymous ADs and coaches that are not happy with this. And the Big Ten specifically said, we're not going to schedule Texas Tech. And there was a rumor, and USC was in that rumor, that potentially Texas Tech and USC were trying to get together, or Texas Tech and someone in the Big Ten were trying to get together for a home and home on the schedule. That's no longer going to happen because the Big Ten has come out and said we're not scheduling them. None of our schools are going to schedule them. So those people, now you can call that, I think, childish or whatever, but at least they're trying to make a point. I think the guy that's going to have to step up, and I just bragged about him, I don't know if it was last week or 2 weeks ago, Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner, who I think is as good as it gets, which is not a super high bar for the record, but he's going to have to step in and say the Big 12 is ruling Brendan Sorsby ineligible. Look, this kid gambled $90,000, and I think I had something wrong last week. He gambled on his own team when he was at Indiana, apparently, not when he was at Cincinnati. So apparently this gambling issue. So that means this gambling issue is a minimum of 2 years old, and maybe even as far back as like his freshman year. But he's wagered $90,000 on college football and then some bets on his own team. There was a kid from Iowa, and I believe the quarterback for Iowa State a handful of years ago, that were suspended for the season for making one single bet, because supposedly college football has a zero tolerance policy on betting on your sport. And look, I went through this, and I think I talked about this last week as well. It's hard, you're telling the players, hey, you shouldn't bet, and then you're running FanDuel and DraftKings ads during your games, during your pre-games and all that. The emblems are on at some of the stadiums now because they're sponsoring. So it's a little bit hard to take a pious stance, the NCAA when you're in bed with the gambling dudes. But it's he went to, I'm going to use my air quotes, he went to counseling or rehab. Look, gambling it can be an addiction. It's easy to slip into it. And especially when you're so these are 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids. I still call them kids. And you're handing them millions of dollars in some cases. In this case, this year, this kid's going to make $5 million. And, geez, I got $5 million. I'm definitely going to be betting on some things now. And it's a very easy thing to do. And you should have a zero tolerance policy. Quite frankly, I'm almost coming around, and it'll never happen because of the money that it makes. And it makes for states, and it makes for, to get rid of gambling, because it's becoming a problem, especially in sports. And it's hard to say, well, these kids on campus, just regular students, they can go out and bet on baseball or whatever. They can bet on anything, football. And then you tell the kids that are on the team, we don't want you betting on anything. So it'll be hard to put something in place where they can't bet on other sports. But you darn well should have a zero tolerance policy on betting on your sport. And the fact that he bet on games that he was involved in, bye-bye. That should be adios amigos. He should be gone. He knew when he did it what the potential fallout could be if he was found out. So it's and especially and a lot of the Iowa and Iowa State fans are irate about this because they watched their two kids get yanked for a year because they made one bet. This kid's been betting for years, $90,000 worth. And he's going to be allowed to play because they found a corrupt judge in their hometown. And that's what's happening. And that's why that bill is in place. And that's why, as much as I think our government should have bigger and better fish to fry than to jump into athletics. However, because our judicial system is filled with corruption everywhere, It's easy for these schools to find judges that will be sympathetic to their cause. Alabama did it. And then maybe the only time I'll praise Greg Sankey, he stepped in and said, now it took him a while. That Bediako kid played about 6 or 7 games, and then Sankey stepped in and said, you know what, we're not doing this. And that was only because of the backlash they were getting. If they wouldn't have got any backlash, he wouldn't have had the guts to step in and do the right thing. But with the backlash, it looked bad for the SEC, and he stepped in. But Alabama found an Alabama judge, an alumni or alumnus. And that's corruption. That's all that is. That's corruption. And so Congress is going to have to step in because the NCAA, first of all, their NCAA is filled with imbeciles and morons to begin with. And they've proven that. I'm not poking fun at someone for, we all know that. We've seen it for years now. But with these court rulings, with the judicial system being as corrupt as it is, and schools being able to find judges, players being able to find, the kid at Mississippi, I think he's a great kid, but he's going to be on year 6 or 7 now at Mississippi, Chambliss. Like the player, anyone's taking anything to court and they're winning because they're going to find a judge that takes their side of it. And then, of course, if it's antitrust stuff, the NCAA doesn't really have a leg to stand on anyway. So as much as I don't want to admit it, they're going to need Congress to step in and figure out a way to fix this system so that they can put a little bit of teeth into it. My problem, and I'm not going to go into it, I did in the column, I did it last week on the podcast, but you can't center it on, the kids are greedy and the kids, we got to limit the kids. Not when the coaches have free reign to make as much money, even when they're not coaching, with buyouts and stuff. And the schools are, the conferences have billion with a B dollar TV contracts that they're splitting among the schools. It's a little disingenuous for the rich and the richer to tell the players that are making them all that money, we're going to limit what you can make. It's the adults in the room, let the horse out of the barn, let the genie out of the bottle, whatever analogy you prefer. And here we are. But this Sorsby thing, no good, no good at all. And it's what a precedent it's setting. It's any kid that has had an itch to gamble is now saying, hey, I got some free money here, my NIL deal or whatever they're calling it nowadays. He got away with it. Why not? And I forget who said it, and it's true. How many times have we said jokingly, boy, that game looks rigged? Whether it's the referees or, maybe the quarterback's playing poorly. And geez, they must be on the payroll of the other. We did jokingly say it. Well, now there are going to be people that watch a game and say, "Well, I wonder. Did that kid have money on this game? I wonder if these results are legitimate." It's a bad precedent that the NCAA. I should say. Let me take that back because I do ridicule them enough. It's a bad precedent that college football is setting if they allow this kid to play. And I think it's Brett Yormark that's going to have to be the one to step in here. And we'll see. The tough spot for him. All right. NFL news. Could the AFC North be more explosive this year? Here's why I asked that question. So Joe Burrow, that's always the question in Cincinnati, will he stay healthy for the full year? But if you get Joe Burrow for a full year, Cincinnati becomes super explosive on offense. We all know that. We've seen it. This one you'll laugh at, but it's true. If Deshaun Watson is the starter in Cleveland and can get somewhere in the neighborhood of Houston Deshaun Watson, Cleveland suddenly becomes more explosive. Baltimore changed head coaches, and of course, staffing that went with that. And Lamar Jackson was quoted this week as saying, "Man, this new offense is fantastic. Like it's electric." I think was the word he used. Um, Now it's June 11th, and so it's hard to say now. But you hear that coming from the quarterback. It's fair to say, well, Baltimore might be more explosive this year. And then in Pittsburgh, Mike McCarthy is an offensive guy. He's a quarterback guy. And look, after watching the Mike Tomlin, and I am calling it the Mike Tomlin offense because he's the one that hired the last three buffoons that were the offensive coordinators in Pittsburgh, that ran like 6 tight end sets. And was it Feichner that the bubble screen was his favorite play as far back as Ben's last year or so, when he looked like a 96-year-old grandmother out in the field and had to get rid of the ball quickly. It would be hard pressed for the new staff to be less explosive than what we've seen in Pittsburgh from those last three goons that were offensive coordinators. The only thing to me that holds explosiveness back in Pittsburgh is the fact that you're going to have a 42-year-old quarterback. Now, Ben Roethlisberger on his podcast, interestingly, said he thinks they're going to go 12-5 this year. I have them 8-9, by the way. He thinks 12-5 because he said this offense is going to open up like we haven't seen before. And he said Aaron Rodgers will love it. And it's an offense that Rodgers will be more familiar with from his days in Green Bay with McCarthy. I appreciate Ben's optimism. I'm not sure I share that optimism. Now, do I think they're going to be more explosive? Yes. Again, because you couldn't get any less explosive than the last three offenses. The fact that I haven't seen us sign 3 more tight ends is the first good sign. We have Freiermuth and Mount Washington at tight end, and so the fact that now they'll have a third tight end, of course, and maybe they have one now that I just fell under the radar and I didn't see, but so that's the first good sign. But is Aaron Rodgers at 42, much like Ben Roethlisberger when he was banged up at the end of his career, is Aaron Rodgers going to be willing to hold that ball for that tick extra that you need to let a receiver get open down the field? But I think they're going to be more explosive. So the AFC North, I think that's an interesting, Baltimore defense, Pittsburgh defense, Cleveland defense, and Stinkola, kind of a combination. The only team that wasn't known for defense was Cincinnati. And it's cost them, but with Burrow back, it may not matter how good Cincinnati's defense is, because with Burrow and those receivers, they will put up a lot of points. They'll win a lot of games in the 30s in Cincinnati. So I think it's interesting, but I mean, I think that's fair to think that that these all 4 of these teams are going to be a little bit more high octane than what we're used to, and that'll be refreshing because everyone else in the NFL leans to the high octane, the quicker pace and try to score more points. Only Pittsburgh and Baltimore, I think by default, because I don't think their offense was very good, tried to win, more with defense. So, but anyway, my other point, and then I'm going to do a little special segment dealing with the NFL. What about these must we get daily reports on mini camp? Does anyone really care? I know the NFL is, I've said this a zillion times, the NFL is better than any other sport at always being in the news cycle. Every once in a while for something not so great, but most of the time it's for positive stuff. Like, they're just in the news cycle. The Super Bowl no sooner ends, and people start talking about the draft. Well, actually, let me go back a step. They start talking about the combine, and then we watch the combine. watch these guys run in their shorts and lift weights, and then from the combine, everyone starts doing their mock drafts, and they stay in the news. And then free agency hits, and then the draft hits, and then once the draft, then there's the rookie mini camp to get introduced to the set of rookies, and then there's the OTAs, and now there's the mini, just the regular mini camps for the full team. And before you know it, they'll fade out of the news cycle for what, 3 or 4 weeks, and all of a sudden the Hall of Fame game will start. Everyone will start talking about camp. What do they look like in camp? It's amazing. It's amazing, and whether it's Roger Goodell or whoever, the marketing people in the NFL deserve credit for that. But I ask you, as football fans, is it something that you feel like you need to know what's going on at minicamp? And it's Dak Prescott looks great, and who did I see was really slinging it in minicamp? Maybe it was Lamar Jackson, really slinging it in minicamp. Well, I could sling it in minicamp too. You're in shorts and t-shirts. It's give me a break. We don't need to know their every move at minicamp. It's not necessary. And I don't know. I find it somewhat ridiculous that we get all these daily reports, and every team, the people that cover every team, giving us all the ins and outs of minicamp, and of course we had some holdouts, and this guy didn't show up, and I wonder what that means. Goodness gracious. As much as I respect them for always being in the news cycle, maybe not needed quite so much. All right, so my special segment, let me see. Give you some, I don't know if this really fits or not. We're going to go back. I feel like this is like my time machine from my Musings podcast. Remember when in the NFL? Kill the music. Remember when kickers wore the single bar face mask? When I was 8, 9, 10 years old, I didn't need to know the player. If you just showed me his helmet, I could say, oh, that's either the place kicker or the punter. And then if it was the double bar, that was the quarterback. The wider 2 bars with the bars coming down, mid-70s. I remember, I'll tell you, the first person I remember seeing, Lynn Swan, who's lucky to still have a head attached after the beating he took during the 70s. But I remember him being one of the first guys to wear the wide receiver face mask, if you will. And then, of course, the one that came across with the single bar down the middle, I knew that was either offensive line or defensive line or linebacker. Could have been linebacker or fullback, Rocky Blyer, from my childhood Steelers memories. So, but and now it seems like just about everyone has basically the same face mask, other than the linemen do still, not all of them. I have seen some of them with just the triple, or the wide double bar, but yeah. So back in the 70s, you could tell the players just by their face masks. Remember when places like San Diego, Oakland, Baltimore would be playing on the baseball infields? And I remember the first time I saw it, I was like, oh, wait. And then I quickly realized, oh, wait, that's the diamond. That's the baseball field, because they shared stadiums back in those days with their baseball counterparts. And I remember, especially if it would rain, the announcers would always be like, oh, they want to try and finish this drive off going this direction because it's going to be muddy down there where the dirt infield is. And sometimes it played a factor with kickers. But they didn't have, everyone wasn't making $1 bajillion back then, and you shared stadiums with the baseball team in your city. Now, Pittsburgh, Three Rivers Stadium, if it was a turf field, they could cover the little cutouts that they use on turf fields in baseball. They would just cover those up with with artificial turf. But anyway, speaking of, remember AstroTurf? AstroTurf was before all this fancy modern day synthetic fibers fields that we have now. AstroTurf was essentially, if you were a kid like me, you either had or you had a friend that had the green indoor outdoor carpet that looked like a putting green or a mini golf putting green. Or you had a putting green if you were a golfer, one of those, that you laid out and you practiced your putting. That was AstroTurf. And they basically put it down on top of the concrete that was underneath and said, there you go, boys, have at it. And I mean, they took beatings on AstroTurf. I had a chance in, I guess it was 1996. I got to walk across Three Rivers Stadium. I was helping a local reporter. He was covering the game. Steelers Patriots. Actually, the Steelers clinched that day. And you're allowed on the field during the fourth quarter if you're a reporter. So we went down. And that was my first chance on a professional. I think I had been on it at some high schools. When I was in when I was in band, we'd have competition. I think I stepped on it somewhere else, but this was my first time. And now remember, this is 20 years removed from the 70s where it was, really AstroTurf. This had a little sponginess to it. But I said to my friend I was with, I said, boy, this stuff is still hard. Like you can feel underneath, like you can feel the concrete underneath, and how hot it would get in the summer for baseball. Because that concrete underneath, but AstroTurf was unforgiving back in the 70s. You would talk about concussions, no wonder. The helmets weren't great, and the AstroTurf was like playing out on the street, basically. And when your head rocked off that, you were knocked for a loop. Remember when Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen were the best team in NFL announcing? Merlin Olsen, famous for his Little House on the Prairie stint, and also famous for being a great football player. And Dick Enberg was as good as it got back then. Enberg was number one in those days. Oh my! I loved it, and you knew it was the big game, much like Nance and Romo, today, or Brady and whoever that buffoon is that he's with, Burkhart. They couldn't hold a candle to, none of them would hold a candle to Dick Enberg and Merlin Olsen. And it was always the 4:00 game. Like 99% of the time they were on the 4:00 game, and they would do the promos for. I'm trying to think what would be coming on NBC at 7:00 after the football games. I can't think what it would have been, but maybe Disney. Might have been Disney back then. I can't remember, but you just knew what a big game it was, and they were so enjoyable to listen to. Enberg and Olsen. Remember when Dan Pastorini, Jim Hart, Burt Jones, Ken Anderson, Brian Sipe were considered second-tier quarterbacks in the NFL? These guys would all be superstars in today's NFL. I guarantee you. With the level of quarterback play in the league these days, these guys would be absolute superstars. Now, they also wouldn't last long because these guys were all. Pastorini could scramble a little bit. Sipe, Jones, and Anderson could move, a touch. Jim Hart was not moving anywhere. These guys were pocket quarterbacks, like most were through the 70s and 80s, into the 90s. But as a kid, I guess I probably didn't realize it because I also got to watch Terry Bradshaw and Roger Staubach and Bob Creasy. And, then Joe Montana came along, into the 80s. And they were superstars. Those guys were superstars. And, you didn't realize that Pastorini, Hart, Jones, Anderson, Sipe, like they were really, really good. But they always seem second rate compared to the Bradshaws and the Staubachs and the Greaseys, Dan Fouts. They just didn't seem up to that standard. And I think about it, and it's like, man, today they would be absolute studs in the NFL as quarterbacks. Remember when we had the greatest nicknames? Sweetness, the Juice, the Snake, Hammer. So the nicknames were just they were just better. Like the guys today don't really have. Maybe they have nicknames amongst themselves, but you rarely hear the announcers. How about White Shoes Johnson? There's one I forgot. Billy White Shoes Johnson, because he wore the white shoes. They were characters. They were characters. Mean Joe Green, right? If you're a Steelers fan. So we had much better nicknames when I was a kid. Just no doubt about it. Remember when we had the Steel Curtain, the Doomsday Defense, the Purple People Eaters? When we nicknamed, now the Steelers defense, when it gets good, oftentimes will still get referred to as the Steel Curtain. There was one Steel Curtain, and that was the Steelers of the 70s. But you don't hear those. You don't hear those nicknames. Oh, first of all, defense is sort of passé in the NFL nowadays. Like, oh, you want us to play defense? Okay. So back then, defense mattered, and we had great nicknames for them. So how about, I mentioned characters. I mentioned Mean Joe Green, Bubba Smith, John Madden, Broadway Joe Namath, and maybe the biggest character of all back then, Bum Phillips. It's not that I enjoy watching the coaches, but they're so, like, first of all, we have a ton of young coaches nowadays. Sean McVay's not a character. Mike McDaniel was a character, but he also wasn't very good as a head coach, and he didn't last as a head coach. That's the trick to it. You can be a character, but you also have to be good. Like Mean Joe Green's a Hall of Famer. Bubba Smith was fantastic. I can't remember if he's in the Hall of Fame or not. John Madden was a great coach, maybe the best color announcer we've ever had, and they named a video game after him. He was good. Bum Phillips. Now, he couldn't kick that door in Pittsburgh, but he won a lot of games as a head coach. So they were characters, but they were also good at what they did. And you just don't see it. Sean McVay, I think, is a genius, but I wouldn't call him a character. Mike Vrabel maybe acts off the field like a character, but doesn't. I wouldn't call him a character. Mike McCarthy's not a character. Mike Tomlin wasn't a character. The Harbaughs. Jim could maybe fall into the character. Jim's more weirdo than character, though, and John's just an idiot. So, as I try to think around, Sirianni's a moron that wins Super Bowls somehow. I wouldn't call him a character. The guy in San Francisco is another, like, he's a brainiac, but not a character. It's just, maybe Dan Campbell in Detroit would be, as just off the top of my head, would maybe be the closest we would have to someone you would call a character in the game. But we had characters, just goofy guy, but they were good at their jobs, whether it be a player or a coach or an announcer for that fact. In Madden's case, Broadway Joe Namath, man, not too many people can say, hey, I called my shot and I carried through, saying they would win the Super Bowl. And then the fur coats and all that stuff. Like, these guys today, I know they all have they get their wardrobe. They have wardrobe artists. Hey, what am I going to walk into the stadium in today? Joe Namath picked his own stuff out. He said, give me that bad boy over there, that fur coat. That's what I'll be wearing, because he was a character. These guys today, they're not characters. So that's my remembrance of days gone by. Remember when in the NFL. You have to be old like me to remember that. Some of you, if you're a young listener, you're like, well, what the hell is he talking about? I have no idea what he's talking about. But if you're my age, a little older, a little younger, you get it. You get it. And you know I'm true on that. Everything I said. So, all right. That is going to do it. I'm going to bunker up here. We got a storm headed our way. It was real feel 107 here in central Pennsylvania today. June 11th, mind you, not July 11th or August 11th, June 11th. We have had some weird weather for the last, we had 90s back in April. It's been insane, but it was a real feel 107. I know this because I did yard work today. So that wasn't my brightest move. But anyway, I will be back. So I was looking at my schedule. I am going to have to do some I call them filler podcasts until we get to some of the season previews. It's going to be a little bit yet. Maybe 1st of July. I usually get a week. I do a week off for vacation. So it'll be a little while before we start to preview. So I'll kick some things around, but that was fun. I'll probably do one for college football. I'll remember when for college football next week to go along with some of the little news and tidbits that are happening in the current state of football. So I will be back then. Stay out of the heat if you're somewhere where I am. And you know the drill. Be nice to one another.